This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Let's be realistic. The only thing we really care about at this point with the NFL draft is, are the Eagles any better to win the division next year? Let's be realistic. Because everyone wants to keep talking about everybody, the three other teams, how they did in the draft. But have we really talked about, are the Eagles better for next year to win the division? Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here on 97.3 ESPN. Ryan, happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday. Let's do it, Josh. So, like we said yesterday, the Miami Dolphins already won the Super Bowl, and the Eagles already lost it. So I guess we can just dive into the NFC East, but clearly that's been won by another team, right?
Well, I mean, if off seasons are won, if the off season wins you a championship, sure. And listen, we got to get into that because I feel like there's been a lot of conjecture about how good or bad certain teams are depending on the draft. I was watching Sports Center late last night, and they were asking a couple of different people about who had a good draft, who had a bad draft, and I thought it was really interesting because one guy lost his mind last night, another guy lost his mind this morning about certain teams being suggested they had a good draft. So I figure we need to have a conversation, Ryan, about legitimately what is the impact of the Eagles draft picks and what is this team going to look like in 2020? Because here's what we know. You drafted 3 wide receivers and you traded for another one. There is no guarantee that all 4 of those receivers are going to be on the opening day roster. You drafted 2 linebackers, or are really sure that both of those linebackers will be on the roster to start the season. When you look at Jalen Hurts, is he really going to be the backup quarterback, or are they going to go out and maybe sign another backup quarterback? They didn't draft any running backs. Right now, the only running backs on the roster are Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Elijah Holyfield. That's right, the son of the heavyweight champion is on the Eagles roster. So, and by the way, Corey Clement is still out there recovering from a shoulder surgery, which I love the report I read this morning that he'll be ready for non-contact drills next month. Although there's no drills next month anyway, but fine. So, Ryan, what exactly are we expecting of this roster to look like when it comes September 1st?
So here's how I answer that question, Josh. And I'm going to try and understand, which this is a scary proposal, but I'm going to try and understand the people and the fans' mindset and point of views who are really upset after the Eagles selected Jalen Hurts and just maybe the Eagles draft as a whole. But when I look at the Eagles draft and we sit here today on April 28th, I feel like I'm a fan of the draft, as we discussed yesterday. I thought the Eagles and Howie did a good job overall. We'll see if that pans out and what happens. But I don't feel like a lot of the moves are impact now type of moves. And I think that's what some of the Eagles fans were maybe feeling without fully recognizing it. Like I think a lot of the transactions and draft picks and moves that the Eagles have made are more down the road type of impact. Whereas some of the moves that the Cowboys made, you say, okay, they could be potentially geared up, ready to go this year. I'm not saying the Cowboys are favorites to win the NFC East, but how much different, Josh, are the Eagles today than they were last week?
Well, I think the biggest difference is that, we spent an entire year last year, almost every day here on 97.3 ESPN, talking about the wide receiver position. And last year, you were down to Deontay Burnett and company, along with Greg Ward playing receiver and even asking Josh Perkins to go out and stretch out wide, even though he's a tight end, glorified slot receiver. And now you brought in 4 different receivers. 2 of them are definitely guys who can play on the outside, and 2 more that, we kind of have to wait and see what their fit would be on the team in John Hightower and Watkins. We know that Rager and Goodwin can play on the outside. So I would say just from the wide receiver additions, this team has definitely upgraded a position of necessary depth at wide receiver, along with getting some legitimate speed and athleticism out there. So hopefully we don't have to depend on Deontay Burnett next year.
Absolutely. And that's great. But I think that depth, which is good, But I guess what I'm asking is how much of that depth can we confidently say right now, today, can we confidently predict, I should maybe say, that they're going to make an impact this fall, that they're going to make an impact whenever the 2020 NFL season starts? We can fully believe in Deshaun Jackson, and that's not even really what we're talking about, but we're looking at the offense as a whole for a second.
Sure.
Can we fully believe in Jalen Reagor? Can we fully believe, in Sanders coming back the next year? Can we believe in Hightower? The names go on and on. I think I believe in Jalen Reagor. I think he's going to be a good player. But I also feel like, especially early on in his career, he's going to need other weapons around him in the offense to deliver for him to really thrive. I don't know how you feel.
Well, first of all, I would say that looking at next year, I'm working under the assumption, because of everything we know, that, for example, Deshaun Jackson's going to be healthy. And if Jalen Reagor is a guy, is half the player we think he can be, then he should be able to make an impact week one, whether he's specifically starting or not. And Marquise Goodwin has been in a couple of different offenses at this point that I think the concepts of the Eagles offense are not that far-fetched. And I don't know if you saw the video, but he kind of went out there and trolled the Eagles receivers a little bit, because he basically kept asking, what number should I wear? And he was bringing up the number of every dude who's not Deshaun Jackson and Alshon Jeffrey currently on the Eagles roster, bring up their numbers to be like, I look good in that number. So he's out there already having a good time, expecting to make the Eagles roster. So, I'm assuming, again, that worst case scenario, that you're going to have at least Goodwin and Reagor at this moment making the roster. And I'm not 100% sure what Hightower and Watkins' impact will be, but there's a lot of talk that one of those guys could be a special teams guy. And if someone's going to return kicks and punts, whether it's Reagor or Watkins or Hightower, and then maybe it is Marquise Goodwin and Deshaun Jackson on the outside week one, that only makes Ertz and Goddard even more valuable, along with Sanders underneath, because you have these two speedsters clearing out the top of the defense.
Yeah, and the biggest part of the Eagles offense in my mind, and this isn't like rocket science, but Ertz and Goddard. It just seems like to me, and a lot of people, the Eagles have a lot of their offensive success, their most consistent success, when they really go through those type of sets where Ertz and Goddard are on the same field at the same time. That's when I feel like the Eagles are really strong. And maybe that's just because they haven't had the speed and the weapons that a Doug Peterson type of offense really needs to thrive. Now, let's just assume, like you said, Deshaun Jackson's healthy. Let's just assume Jalen Reagor is able to make an impact right now. I think the other question is, where does Alshon Jeffrey fit in? Are the Eagles going to be able, like you mentioned, to really move on from him? Either way, he's not going to be a part of this team for the first half of the season. Who steps up? And how much different is the offense going to look? Because last year, there's no comparison. Like you said, they're playing with pizza delivery guys at wide receiver. We don't even know what this offense could potentially look like this upcoming season, and how creative Doug can really get now in the 2020 year. Do you think we can see a really different dynamic type of offense now because of the moves that the Eagles made?
I really do. And by the way, the text board is open at 609-403-0973. You can let us know what you think of the Eagles offense going into next year and how they stand in the NFC East. Look to the other three teams in just a little bit. But I think one of the things, Ryan, you asked about how dynamic the offense can be. It can be immensely more dynamic, also because of the fact that it's going to be year 2 for Miles Sanders. Despite Carson Wentz getting injured in that playoff game, he played all 16 games last year. I think there's something to be said for the fact that you have another year of certain guys playing together, cohesiveness, chemistry, familiarity, Greg Ward, all these guys knowing each other and knowing their roles only can help expand the playbook. And let's not forget, the Eagles are the only team in the NFC East with the same coaching structure returning from last year to this year. So we can't overlook the fact that while the other three teams are going to be teaching their players a new offense, Doug Peterson is coming in, aside from a couple new players, with the same personnel next year?
The running back position is really interesting, and I'm glad that you brought it up. Are we putting too much pressure potentially on Miles Sanders, or is that never going to be a problem because of Doug Peterson? From what we know, history tells us he likes to have multiple running backs in there, and it only really seems that he goes to one guy early and often or consistently through a game and through a season if his hands are tied. Is the plan to potentially be something different? Is Miles Sanders going to be called upon to be somewhat of a workhorse? I don't think so. So if that's not the case, we look at the running back position and Miles Sanders, does he have a sophomore slump? Is Boston Scott capable of being a guy we saw in those 2 or 3 games at the end of the season last year? Who's going to be the third guy? So that running back position, Josh, I want your thoughts and the listeners as well. Text in. Are we a little bit skeptical of that position?
Well, I think you should always be skeptical when you have questions around any position because of the fact that all we know about this running back position is last year we ended the year with Miles Sanders and Boston Scott. Now, a lot of people liked Boston Scott and what we saw of Boston Scott, but there's no guarantee that Boston Scott is going to be everything we want him to be, because part of the reason of his success was because, teams didn't really know what they were getting when he was out in the field, and the Eagles were kind of be able to slide him into that, what they call the Darren Sproles role. Now, coming into this year, how much do teams plan for him? And with Miles Sanders, if he gets an expanded role, what does that mean then for the next guy on the depth chart? So you have Elijah Holyfield under contract. I'm not 100% guaranteeing that guy's going to be your power back, but you mentioned what Doug Peterson's history is. Whether it's Jordan Howard, whether it's LeGarrette Blount, whether it's Jay Ajayi, or fill in the blank, year one it was Ryan Matthews. They like to have a big-bodied back there. So I'm curious to see, Ryan, if one of the things that they do is, do they go out and sign a veteran power back to complement Sanders and Scott and compete with Holyfield for the position? For example, Carlos Hyde, Isaiah Crowell, Devonta Freeman, 3 big-bodied backs who are all free agents that you probably could get for pennies on the dollar right now.
And here's something that I think we can all overlook, and I'm not saying you and I aren't aware of this, but we look at the positions, and going into the draft, everyone's throwing their hands up in the air, looking at the sky. We need receivers. We need more wide receiver depth. We have no one. Please go get that special guy. And we'll see if they got that. But I think a big part here, obviously, is Carson Wentz and his development.
Yep.
And how much easier is his job going to be now because of this draft? How much can he really grow? I was critical of Carson at times last year. I think some of it was fair, some of it wasn't. Whatever. But he really needs to have a big year. And maybe that Jalen Hurts pick lights a fire up, under his butt. But I think number 11, Josh, how much better can he get this offseason heading into the NFL 2020 calendar year?
Well, I think the big deal is the fact that, again, he's the only quarterback in the division that has the same offense and basic structure of coaching staff in place from last year to this year. I don't think we can overlook the fact that Wentz has the same head coach and the same offense and the same QB coach / passing game coordinator in Press Taylor from last year to this year, and that stability can only help him. And I'm going to assume that the instability in Dallas may not 100% help Prescott. Oh, by the way, he still hasn't signed that contract of his, but I digress. Wentz, listen, he's under contract. No matter what, he's going to be there. He's already reaching out to everybody and their cousin, welcoming them to the team. I wouldn't be surprised if when some of these lockdowns start letting up, that Wentz tells everybody to come to North Dakota to hang out and go play some football this summer to work on the playbook. So I'm expecting Wentz to actually have some growth from last year to this year because, one, the offense is in place, and two, it seems to be part of his personality that he wants to learn and to grow. And I think the fact that he is that kind of person and that kind of athlete and that kind of competitor and all that kind of jazz, I think Wentz's intangibles combined with the stability of the offense actually can help him grow.
Listen, I'm with you, and I agree. And sure, he's a learner. He wants to get better. He's a competitor. Last year, he seemed shaky at times, and I think a lot of that wasn't his fault. The environment was shaky. So when you're in an unstable environment and when you have inconsistency surrounding you, the result is you're going to be touched by that and it's going to impact you. So I understand it. But for me, and I'm not trying to make this conversation all about Carson. We can shift away from him here in a second. But for me, it's all about Carson. And if he can really take that next step where we don't have to have those conversations, is he the MVP we saw in 2017 or is he just a solid NFL starter? I don't think those questions are fully answered yet. We know he's an MVP talent, but can he actually consistently be that guy? And if the answer is yes, a lot of these other questions are not going to have as much weight to them as they currently have.
609-403-0973 is the text board to get in on the conversation. Dan from EHT chimes in, says the draft is so unpredictable. Experts thought J.J. Arcega-Whiteside should have been ready for an immediate impact last year, and he was not. Now, there is one point about that. I'm glad he brought this up. This is where the Eagles coaching staff making mistakes last year, Ryan, could help the team this year. The Eagles coaching staff admitted they did not cross-train J-Jaw to play multiple wide receiver positions. They only trained him to be the backup for Alshon Jeffrey. And apparently they claim that their lack of allowing him to learn the rest of the offense completely hindered his development. Maybe, just maybe, the Eagles coaching staff and the changes they made will allow them to not make that mistake again in 2020.
Do you really buy that? And maybe that's just the cynic in me with that question, but John McMullen, who knows as much as anyone regarding news and notes for the Philadelphia Eagles, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was saying often that he felt J.J. could not learn the offense. He could not figure out the routes to run and when to run them and the plays that were being called and where he needed to be on the field. And if that was true, then how are you going to be able to cross-train someone if they're not able to learn the playbook? I think that hinders your ability to cross-train them. I feel like the Eagles with that statement are just protecting their player, and I appreciate that, but I don't know. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's a little bit maybe of a reach?
I think that I kind of fall in between both what the Eagles are saying and what reporters like John McMullen are saying. I think there is a little something to the fact that the Eagles limited J-Jaw in training camp and limited his options for them in general. But I think there also is something to be said for the fact that some players, they just take more time to learn an offense. And I think that we can't overlook the fact that one of the reasons why they drafted J.J. Arcega-Whiteside last year was because of his productivity in college. He was a touchdown machine at Stanford. And if you go back and watch it, you realize that his productivity was because of the offense that he was in, maybe not as much because of him. Whereas the guys that they drafted this year, like Rager, Hightower, Watkins, trading for Goodwin, those four receivers have shown that they also are not, they're not just byproducts of the offense they're in. So maybe the hope, and again, this is just conjecture, we won't know 100% until these guys actually get on the field, but I'm assuming the hope is that where Rager will succeed, where J-Jaw struggled, is that Rager was still productive despite being in a garbage offense, averaging 14.2 yards per catch on a garbage team, and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was catching 14 touchdowns when they literally had a specific route customized for him to catch all those touchdowns. I feel like there at least might be a difference, and maybe the Eagles are going to learn from their mistakes of last year and hopefully do better with their receivers this year.
That's a really interesting point that you bring up, because if J-Jaw was that good, you would have to believe he would have been able to find a way to make some type of impact last year, right?
You would assume.
Right? Like, if you're that successful in college and the team believes in your talent and ability and potential that much, how was he not able to see the field at all, especially everything going on last year? And that circles the conversation back to this year's draft. And you look at Justin Jefferson. And he's a guy that I think you could almost compare to Jay Jaw, can't you? He's a guy that I think some of the criticisms were, well, maybe he's just a byproduct of being a part of the greatest offense in college football history in a single season. And you look at Jalen Reagor, and he had an awful quarterback. He stayed home at TCU. He denied offers to bigger schools. And he was in an environment that was much more challenging to succeed, and he did. So I think you hit the nail right on the head with that, Josh, that the Eagles at least are trying to learn from their mistakes, and they're going to get guys that they're confident can find a way to make impacts regardless of what's going on.
By the way, just to compare the two, J.J. Arcega's last two seasons at Stanford, 2017, 2018, he combined for 23 receiving touchdowns. Justin Jefferson's last two seasons at LSU, 2018, 2019, he combined for 24 receiving touchdowns. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside averaged 16.4 receiving yards per catch. Justin Jefferson, 14.6 receiving yards per catch. So read into that what you will, considering, like you said, Ryan, he was part of the greatest offense in college football history.
Yeah, like I said, I think you nailed that. And I think we almost stumbled upon the answer as to why the Eagles didn't go Justin Jefferson. I mean, I know they need speed, and they believe in Reagor and his he's diversified skill set and his ability to play multiple positions. But I still think what you just said could have been a big factor.
609-403-0973 is the text board to get on the conversation. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein, talking about the Eagles, and we'll talk NFC East as well. Are the Eagles the favorites? Should they be the favorites? We'll get into that as well as a lot more with the NFL. Of course, the draft is still simmering down, and people are already conjecturing. You know, we've all seen the odds out there about who's going to win the NFC. Do you look at the Eagles and say they could win the NFC, or is it too early to tell? Or are you still waiting for them to sign a running back or cornerback in free agency? 609-403-0973. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein, right here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.
Bruh, y'all be working my nerves, dog. We did this last year. Oh, they gonna win the Super Bowl. I told y'all then. No, they not. They didn't even make the playoffs. And so now all of a sudden, Jerry Jones makes the right choice with the first round pick. He gets CeeDee Lamb. Oh, they're so good again. Last year, we were talking about this team having a possibility to go to the Super Bowl. They don't even make the playoffs. The Philadelphia Eagles are playing with a former quarterback at wide receiver, a walk-on running back starting at tailback, or the second tailback, and me as the wideout on the other side. That's how terrible they were, and they still couldn't beat them. So now you add Darius Slay on the other side. When you do play well against Philadelphia, you're able to beat them on the outside. Amari Cooper burns them deep. That's not happening no more. He will be locked down by Darius Slay.
Some strong words there from Ryan Clark, former NFL safety for the Steelers and Redskins. Ryan, he is tired. He says he's tired of hearing everybody picking the Cowboys to win the division. He feels like the Cowboys are just way too talked about. He literally just said, bruh, you're getting on my nerves.
I want to give Ryan Clark a standing ovation because I saw this earlier, as I'm sure you have as well, and hearing that audio. Dude, listen. We've said this a lot on the Sports Bash last year, the year before. I'm going to be 30 years old in a few weeks. I have never seen a good Dallas Cowboys football team. In my entire lifetime, I have never witnessed it. All right, I've never seen them make a deep playoff run. They've never even really been a legitimate threat to the Philadelphia Eagles in my lifetime. Yeah, they've won here or there, 1 year, down here for the Eagles, whatever it may be. But they've never done what the Eagles have done in my lifetime, nowhere close. And why every offseason, I know why, they're America's team, Jerry Jones. Oh, maybe this is the year. Yep, this is it. Well, CeeDee Lamb fell to the Cowboys at 17. So now this is the year that the Cowboys go to the Super Bowl. And they finally, fired Jason Garrett. Well, this is the year now. I can't do it. If you want to crown him, crown him. I'm not going to crown him, Josh.
Yeah, and this is where I really feel like when people talk way too negatively about the Eagles, it's something I've talked with multiple people about in recent weeks. And everybody agrees with me, and that's fine. But why can't anyone admit that the Eagles are the only team in the division that are not teaching an entirely new offense? The Cowboys, yeah, they drafted CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, they drafted Trayvon Diggs of Alabama, the quarterback. Yeah, they drafted some interesting players. I mean, I think we're all surprised who were draft geeks like me that Bradley Anae of Utah fell to the 5th round. Great pickup by the Cowboys, but they have an entirely new offense and defensive coaching staff coming in there to teach, and they have no offseason, no OTAs, no minicamp to teach any of these guys any of this stuff, and we expect them to just step on the field and hit the ground running just because they drafted some nice picks? Come on, man.
Like, how much of a difference? Come on, man. How much of a difference can Mike McCarthy really make?
I have no idea. I've only seen Mike McCarthy with Hall of Fame quarterbacks.
Right. And Dak Prescott, I mean, listen, Dak has been a good quarterback. I think we've had the Dak Carson debate way too much. The whole world has. Fine. You have a guy in Dak that you still don't really know what you have yet. But what is Mike McCarthy going to do? Like, was Jason Garrett that bad? I mean, he was. I was not a fan of Jason Garrett. We joked the biggest weapon the Eagles had last year was Jason Garrett. But he was still a smart football guy. Like, as far as scheme goes and as far as playing to the Cowboys' strengths, I don't know. Maybe they just ride Zeke now. Or maybe the addition of CeeDee Lamb is really going to open things up. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I mean, you look now at the draft reviews after the draft and what it means for the divisions, and I'm seeing everywhere that the Cowboys on paper are the clear-cut favorite. Even on paper, I don't see that. I don't think it's that much of a separation between the Cowboys and the Eagles. Do you?
No, and I think we can't overlook the fact that there is something to be said for the fact that, listen, the Eagles have stability and nobody else does. And following up on this point, this is what Saints head coach Sean Payton said. This was roughly a few weeks ago, talking about how he thinks that not having OTAs in his minicamp is going to hurt teams that don't have the same structure as last year to this year. And he compared it to 2011. Take a listen.
We experienced that in 2011. In 2011, if you recall, was the lockout season where we had our draft. You know, we sent the paperwork out. Players had the playbook, and but it wasn't until training camp that we got started. Look, I think universally for 32 teams, obviously that impacts each team a little differently. I think it's more difficult for the teams with new coaches. I think it's more difficult for the teams that have had a greater amount of player turnover.
So you have a guy who's coached in the league for what, almost 14 years now as a head coach, turning around and saying, listen, this reminds me of 2011. And if you go back to 2011, you realize that almost every team that made the playoffs that year were teams that had stability in coaching from the year before to that year. So you're telling me that just because the Cowboys drafted a bunch of nice draft picks, that guarantees them to win the division next year? Are we really dismissing, Ryan, the importance of stability in a coaching staff and an organization?
I can't, and I don't think we are. And newsflash, there's a pretty significant pandemic going around that's impacting the world, and it's impacting the sports world. And with this pandemic that's taken place, the stability and the coaching this offseason and for this 2020 year is going to be even more important. And it's always been as important as it can get. And now, who knows what this offseason is going to look like? Who knows how much practice time in pads these guys are really going to have now? They don't have a lot to begin with.
Right.
So all of that is now even more of an impact. And you have to look at the head coach and the coaching staffs as, I think, the difference maker for this NFL season. And it's always the difference maker, but it's even more so this year.
Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Tom from the Villas chimes in, do you think having someone to mentor now will help Carson Wentz's improvement? That's an outside-the-box question, Ryan, because Wentz has always been the guy being mentored, right? Whether it was Chase Daniel, Nick Foles, Josh McCown, he always had the older guy talking to him, teaching him stuff. Well, could there maybe be a reverse benefit from Wentz having to articulate more what he knows about the offense, somebody else that might enable his ability to be better?
It is an outside the box way of thinking from Tom there. I like it, but I would use that line of thinking with the wide receivers.
Okay.
And didn't we hear that a lot towards the end of last season? Oh, wow, Carson all of a sudden looks like a leader, and he looks like he's really comfortable and he's moving the ball. Why is that? He has guys at the position there that are essentially worse than what they should have. And a lot of people pointed to the young guys are following Carson, and it was easier for Carson to lead that team. Now you have a guy in Hurts who's going to be next to him 24/7, who's going to be looking up to him and looking to Carson for answers. Where even with Josh McCown, and Josh McCown was never a threat to Carson Wentz for his job, but Josh McCown, I think you could argue, maybe knew more at times than Carson Wentz did. And Carson Wentz maybe even looked to him for answers. And Josh McCown was a quarterback coach who was still a player, as the Eagles wanted to keep him on as a coach. So now for the first time, Tom brings up a good point. He has a younger guy that's going to be looking up to him. They're putting all this youth at the wide receiver position for Carson. And it just seems like they're doing everything they can to say, look, this is your team. All these guys around you on offense are younger, and it's your time to lead. Do you think that helps him?
It might, because of the fact that maybe you're telling Wentz, you're the leader of this team. You're supposed to be the man in charge. You're supposed to be the guy. Now prove it. Go out there and be the leader. Take the offense by the horns. You go out and teach these guys, the receivers, the new quarterback. You go out there and be the leader. Maybe this is the next check mark in Wentz's development to say, hey, you want to be legitimate? You want to be one of the best in the league? Now go out and prove it. Listen, Peyton Manning had to do it. Tom Brady's had to do it. Aaron Rodgers had to do it. All the great quarterbacks have had to do it. You want to be a great quarterback, you got to go out there and start teaching the game instead of being the guy being taught. Maybe this is the next step in the process of Wentz's development, and to turn to him and say, listen, we gave you the money. Now earn your money.
That's how I'm looking at it as well. I think he's set up now to lead this team. I think the only question is, are they in? Is this team ready to win now? Because what was the one thing we heard a lot immediately after the season this past year when the Eagles lost the playoff game? It's not a rebuild, it's a retool.
Right.
And I think that's going to be something that we need to continue to bring up, because what is this team? Like, where is this team in the stage of their progression? Is it going to be an easy retool? I mean, how he put that out there, like it's not going to be something that's difficult. Like, this could take a couple years. And where's Carson Wentz in his development and how he leads the team could impact whether they're ready to just quickly retool and go make a run, or it's going to take longer. And I don't know how much patience Howie and the Eagles really have for all this. They're just in an interesting stage, I guess, is my point.
609-403-0973. Another question on the text board I thought was an interesting point, which is the Eagles maybe assumed that J.J. Arcega-Whiteside was from Stanford like Ertz and could make an immediate impact knowledge-wise anyway. Do you think there might sometimes be a bias in saying this guy comes from this university, so I'm assuming this guy can have a certain level of turnaround? You know, fans do that a lot, Ryan, when it comes to draft picks. Is it possible that the Eagles organization maybe made that mistake as well?
I mean, Yes and no. That, like, how much do you think that factors in? I don't feel like the Eagles really do that. I think Chip Kelly did it a little bit with his bias and what he knew. But I don't know. I think the Eagles have shown us that they're willing to get creative and go outside the box with their draft picks. I don't know if they were under that line of thinking with Whiteside. Do you feel that way?
I think that the Eagles were less looking at his school than they were with his production, because I think that when you go back and rewatch J-Jaw in college and see him grab those 14 touchdowns, there's a part of you that thought he was going to be the next Alshon Jeffrey. And listen, he may still be. I'm not saying that he can't develop into that, but I do feel like the Eagles maybe fell in love with his production instead of his skill. And maybe that's another reason why they fired the people they did last season, because maybe those people on the coaching staff and in the front office were leading them down the wrong path, because I think it's very obvious that there's a huge difference in evaluation. You know, Harry Roseman has now told multiple people on multiple platforms from NFL Network and others that, listen, we wanted to go out and get speed. We were tired of, dinking and dunking the ball. We want to push the ball down the field. Well, J-Jaw was never going to push the ball down the field. So you have to wonder if part of the change had to do with their overall evaluation as well. Maybe last year was one type of evaluation, and this year is just totally different in general.
Are we excited about the wide receiver position now?
I am, yeah. Let's go.
Wow.
Come on, we got some real athletes out here. I'm tired of people who always are looking for, the sexiest pick. No, give me a football player who's a great athlete. Nelson Aguilar had all the measurables when he came out of college, right? And the guy can't catch. Now we have not one, not two, not three, but four new additions at wide receiver. If we go by the metrics, you brought up the fact yesterday, Ryan, about how only so few players have an impact in the NFL who are second and third round picks, right? Well, Listen, if the percentage of hitting on these guys is 33%, then one of those three have to hit, and then you bring in a veteran that brings up the odds that at least one of these guys is going to pan out.
Listen, I love it. I love your intensity. I love the passion. I just have to sit here and say, is this it now? Are the Eagles good to go? And is it fair to expect what we could potentially be expecting from Jalen Reagor, from even Deshaun Jackson after last year and him sitting out the entire year? Outside of those two guys, there's just not a lot of confidence from, you can confidently say, I know for a fact player A, B, and C can provide this for our team. There's still a ton of questions. And yes, I'm with you. It's exciting. They got a lot of good athletes with speed. But outside of that, I don't know what we can confidently say about the group. And that leaves me a little bit concerned.
Well, let's also remember that LeGarrette Blount was signed in May of the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl, and it's April 28th. So the next running back for the Eagles may not be signed for another week. That might change all of our minds. So Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Again, the text board is open for you at 609-403-0973. You let us know. Are you excited about the team next year? Are the Eagles the favorites to win the division? Are you really scared of the Cowboys? What about the Redskins and their improved defense with Chase Young and company? 609-403-0973. We'll talk more about that and more coming up. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein, 97.3 ESPN FM and 97.3 ESPN mobile app. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Ryan, I wanted to change the subject because I thought Matthew Berry, SportsCenter anchor, brought up my favorite question on Twitter of the day. And that is, and I'll read Berry's tweet, and I don't agree with his examples, but he says, Dear ESPN, I'll be patiently waiting for a Last Dance type documentary on the following: the 1990s Cowboys, the Showtime Lakers, the 1986 New York Mets, Tiger Woods. Sincerely, your employee and sports fan, Matt. Now, I love the question, but I feel it's a very bad job by him in terms of memory, because One of the reasons why this Last Dance documentary happened is because there was a camera crew that followed the Bulls every day for an entire season. That's a big part of why we have that documentary. So it's not like it was just a random 30 for 30. It was literally Jordan and the NBA agreed to do this filming, and they agreed they would never release this video footage until both sides agreed it was time. So
I think you're taking this too literal, though. It seems like that.
That's who I am. Come on, man. You should know me by now.
That's why, Josh. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. I think he's just saying, hypothetically, what's another doc that you would like to see under this format? Like, I think he understands the logistics, but if there was another camera crew that you could get in a time machine and place to follow a team or a player, who would it be? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, but logistically, well, first of all, let's not remember we had a Magic Bird documentary already, so that was kind of Showtime Lakers. So maybe it would just be like a rebranch off of that. Honestly, I don't think the idea of having a Tiger Woods one would be that bad of an idea. But I feel like we have enough video footage and interviews to cover like 20 years of Tiger Woods in a 10-part documentary, right?
Yeah, I would say so. But hypothetically, like let's say you could put a camera crew in the past to follow any one player or one team. Rattle some off for us, man. What do you got?
Well, the first one I think of is local, and that's the 93 Phillies. I feel like that would be an incredible ESPN doc because, one, it's a beloved team locally, and two, I don't think half the country understands how nuts that team was. And you'd be literally exposing an entire part of the country to something that they've never seen before, which was, Macho Row, those games where they won in extra innings, Nails, all those guys doing all the stuff they did that year, Wild Thing, Mitch Williams. That probably might be one of the greatest loved teams that never won a championship in sports history.
That's a really good one. Now, I had some other ones jotted down, but to stick to the local, and I'm not forcing this one, I think it would be a good one. The 04 Eagles with T.O. And then even leading up to the sit-ups in the driveway, like the breakup of McNabb and T.O., the Super Bowl run. I think that would be interesting, at least for Philly fans. Some other ones that I would like to see, I think Brett Favre, following him would be really cool. He had a lot of ups and downs, his personality. He was kind of a rebel, how he played the game, the stuff off the field. I think Favre would be good. And you know what I heard is actually going to be a documentary in the next few years? The 2008 Redeem Team.
That's interesting. I would definitely be interested in that.
Yeah, so supposedly D. Wade came out maybe last night or the night before, right after The Last Dance, and said that he's been working on, for the past couple years, a documentary on the 2008 team, where it was obviously him, Kobe, LeBron, and the crew that got the U.S., essentially back on the map and on top.
That's very interesting. I think speaking of Dwayne Wade, another one I would like to do is, can we get a documentary about the Heat team with him, LeBron, and Bosh?
Dude, I had that written down. I'm with you.
I want, because we already, we've all seen the Dwayne Wade doc about his life, which was incredible. But I need the whole, from the day LeBron announced to the day LeBron went back to Cleveland. I need that era documented, because I feel like there's a lot of people, even us who lived it, there's questions that we all have about that run, about what was really going on. We've heard all these rumors about how Pat Riley is. I need a little bit more information. I read the book The Soul of Basketball by Ian Thompson, longtime NBA writer, and he's got stuff in that book about Pat Riley. I'm just like, what the heck? So and there's a part of me that really would love to know more information about what was really going on with that organization and that team.
That's a great one. And I literally had Miami Heat team big three written down. I think that would be great. Here's another one that just kind of popped in my head as you were talking that out. I think Popovich would be really interesting in the Spurs. If we were able to travel back in time and get a camera crew to follow Greg Popovich's every move for one season during one of those title runs, because he's a guy that, as we all know, doesn't give us anything. He's very private. We don't really know how he is behind the scenes. If we were able to get inside footage on Pop, I know there's not a lot of juicy stuff there, but just as a basketball guy, I think that would be really interesting as well.
I'll give you another team if it's not NBA. I would love to see a documentary on the 2002-2003 Syracuse team that won the national title. Because that team, first of all, it's the only time Jim Boeheim has won a national championship. And he did it with a one-and-done Carmelo Anthony before the one-and-done was actually a thing. And, I mean, you had Jerry McNamara, Nakeem Warwick, and just a very odd group built around Carmelo. And that was a team that a lot of people weren't really sure what to expect. They lost the first game of the year to Memphis, for goodness sake. That was John Calipari's Memphis, by the way, back then. And they went on to win the national title. I would love to know, like, what went into Carmelo choosing Syracuse? Why did he choose Syracuse? What were the other players thinking about him? All of his, cohorts were going into the draft that year straight out of high school, and he went to college.
That'd be a good one. That's another good call. That is one of the most interesting teams in college basketball history.
All right, Ryan, your Twitter is
Ryan973 ESPN. But more importantly, Josh, happy birthday to my dad. Love you, bro.
Well, there you go. Dad gets a birthday drop on the air right there. I am at Josh Hennig. Hennig spelled Hennig. My dad's birthday's not till September, so he's not getting a birthday wish today.
Good. It's about my dad.